Here's why I am madder than darn it if I'm Bruce Pearl today at the end of July when I'm about to start having my 3-on-3 workouts and football takes center stage. So Jim Harbaugh gets a 4-game suspension for lying to the NCAA. Bruce Pearl, essentially, his firing was forced, and he got a 3-year show cause that completely put his career on hold. So Jim Harbaugh explained to those that don't know how he lied to the NCAA.
Yes. So Jim Harbaugh lied to the NCAA about a violation, a recruiting violation in 2021. It was a rules violation. It had to deal with recruiting during the COVID dead period. Something that very similar to Bruce Pearl was the most minor violation, and had he just come clean, it wouldn't have been a big deal. But he did.
It's always the cover up, going back to Nixon, isn't it?
Going back to Nixon, always the cover up. For me, it was I did not have. Okay, sorry.
But anyway, so it's a very minor infraction. He lies to the NCAA. That's it for me. He's fired. Okay, if I'm Michigan, you lie to the NCAA, that's your governing body, or you lie to me, you're fired. Same thing with players. If you lie to me, you're pretty much gone. Is there a rare exception where you could be like an incredible player and it's a gray area? Yeah, but for the most part, you lie to me, you're gone. That's always been my stance on that. So I have no problem with Bruce Pearl as much as I love him and I had a great relationship with him and I wanted him to stay at UT, but he lied to UT on multiple instances. He lied to the NCAA at least once, quite possibly twice. That to me is a very fireable offense. So to get a 4-game suspension is nothing close to putting your career on hold for basically 4 years. He should have gotten something even worse, in my opinion, because I think lying is, in these situations, unforgivable. Jim Harbaugh would not be my football coach if I'm the athletic director at Michigan. You just can't lie in these situations. And Tennessee has proven that. They came clean and they were honest, and the NCAA took it easy on them. You do the opposite. And don't think the NCAA is not going to remember this. If Michigan gets in trouble 2-3 years from now, that might be when they drop the hammer on Michigan. Tennessee's reputation is the exact opposite. It's we're going to help you police ourselves. So if something happens at Tennessee 3 years from now, they're going to get the benefit of the doubt. I'd have fired Jim Harbaugh. He doesn't want to be there anyway, but that's a whole different conversation. Bruce Pearl can be mad right now if he wants to, but when you lie to your employer, that is a fireable offense with cause, without your buyout. That's where I stand on that, Caleb, and always will. And get your thoughts on that. But I can give you an example when I was in that position, and there were some people questioning my integrity at the time, and I'll be more than happy to tell that story. I don't think I've told it publicly before. But your thoughts on lying to a superior in these sorts of situations is fireable, done, end of story.
I mean, I'm one of those people that weighs the success and necessities against the morals. I'm going to be honest. And here's where I say that. I think here's Michigan's conundrum. I don't think they can get a much better coach than Jim Harbaugh. And the reason I
agree with that. And I agree he's a top 10 coach in the nation.
Exactly. So let's think about when these things have happened. One, yes, Tennessee fired Bruce Pearl. A lot of people think Mike Hamilton should have stuck with him for the whole time, even through the show calls. But what people don't understand is
he tried. Remember they had that press conference where he was going to be suspended for 6 games, and then the NCAA said, hey, I'm going to make a phone call to Mike.
Yeah, exactly. And also remember, Tennessee was under – here was the real thing. Football's the engine that drives the train. Tennessee was under an NCAA investigation for football violations at that same moment. You can't thumb your nose at the NCAA to save your basketball program when your football program is on thin ice. That you just can't do that. But And then another similar situation that happened around that same time. Let's give a comparison. Remember Jim Tressel lying to Ohio State about the covering up the players?
Can't lie.
But I'm going to tell you this right now. I'm going to tell you why Ohio State fired Jim Tressel and Michigan didn't fire Jim Harbaugh. Dave, you and I both know Ohio State had a secret deal with Urban Meyer to hire him a year later, and Luke Fickell was undercut that whole entire season he was coaching Ohio State. He had absolutely no support because he knew that he was going to be the same way Bill Battle knew he was going to be pushed out midway through 1976. Luke Fickell knew that he was going to be pushed out no matter what happened because they wanted Urban Meyer, and Urban Meyer was undercutting him at every single turn. And that's why they were willing to fire Jim Tressel, because Urban Meyer was on the open market. Michigan doesn't have an Urban Meyer on the open market right now.
Let me share this story with you. I know a lot of people don't like journalists and don't like media, that they think intrinsically that they are maybe disingenuous or maybe even untruthful. When in my experience, it's been the exact opposite. I know of a person who one time was asked to get a comment from Philip Fulmer. He said Philip Fulmer didn't feel like talking about it because he forgot to ask. That was a lie. And he was drafting his resignation letter the next day, and I talked him out of it. But as it comes back to me, let me share a story. So many of you, if you Google me and Inky Johnson, who I love to death, I interviewed him because a person within the program said Tennessee Sports Information Department is not making him available. This is about 2.5 weeks after the Air Force injury. He really wants to say thank you to the fans. I'm like, super. All the interviews went through Tennessee Sports Information Department. Everybody had requested him at the time. So, and good morning, Mr. Grindstaff from Wisconsin. So we're talking about how you don't lie to catch you up at the job. So I go meet with not only the sports editor, but the executive sports editor, the overall editor of the paper. I tell them exactly what happened, Caleb, exactly what happened. Well, Tennessee has a different version of it because they felt bad that their sports information department didn't make Inky available sooner. And then they had every other media member that was mad that I got an exclusive with Inky. So I got a call from a publisher the day after they had decided to suspend me from the Alabama game. And, the News Sentinel had written that I was not in the wrong in any shape, form, or fashion later on that week. But I got a call from the publisher. So this is the head of all the editors, Caleb. This is the one you don't want to screw up. And he says, Dave, I just want to make sure everything you told me is 1,000% honest and correct. And I said, 1,000,000%. Everything I told you. So at that point, and I've always had this fear of being accused of something I didn't do. So the Tennessee's notion was I caught Inky in a parking lot, ambushed him. Not true. So I go home later. Well, no, we went to a bar, my wife and I, because it was a very stressful time. And after about 2 bourbon and Cokes, my wife looks at me and says, don't you have that on tape? And sure enough, I recorded every phone conversation because I can't transcribe fast enough. And you could hear it ring that he was calling me, Inky was calling me. And he said, hey, Dave, how are you? So it was the exact opposite of an ambush. So I sent that to basically everybody, the University of Tennessee president, my publisher, and everybody, just to know that I had not in any shape, form, or fashion misled them. And this was set up by an intermediary. The problem was you didn't want to burn the intermediary because he was essentially the source, which Caleb would certainly get from a journalistic standpoint. Had I lied at that moment, when my publisher says, hey, 1,000% true, if I lied to him at that moment, or I lied previously into the investigation into that, I should have been fired on the spot. Boom. No cause. Don't even pay me for the rest of the week. That's how I feel about lying in these situations. I know there are gray areas to some people, but in certain situations, there ain't no gray areas. That wasn't a gray area for me in my career. Jim Harbaugh or Bruce Pearl lying to the governing body, the SEC or the NCAA or both, or your immediate supervisor, the athletic director, is absolutely unforgivable. And I love Bruce to death. And if he sees this, Bruce, I love you. But I understand why the university had to do what it had to do. And I will tell you right now that Jim Harbaugh is not my head coach if I'm at the University of Michigan.
I understand that. I mean, I totally understand that. And theoretically, from a moral perspective, you're right. And Michigan could probably, I mean, even let's take even the moral side out of it. They might be able to save themselves a headache because given the fact that, like you said, Jim Harbaugh is looking to leave every year anyway, I know they don't think they can find a better head coach, but like, do you really want a head coach who has this violation, suspended 4 games, and you know the second he gets an offer, he's out, he's gone, and
he's gone to the NFL and begged for a job. So I could make a strong, pragmatic argument that you're looking for an excuse to move on.
Right, exactly.
You should be looking at this as like, holy goodness, he just opened this up. I don't have to pay him to buy out. Cruise on out. I don't know who you hire in place of him, but I hate that question. If you're a proud university that has a foundation, you don't say, well, who can we get? Is that what people said when the Jeremy Pruitt stuff was going down? Well, you happened to go out and make a great hire because you had a great athletic director. I hate that term. Well, who can we get?
Well, great. Yes.
That's something that Kansas should say.
Maybe Michigan doesn't have fit in Michigan. Actually, I mean, Kansas made a great hire late too after firing Les Miles. They landed Lance Leipold out of nowhere. But maybe with Michigan, they're having this thought that maybe they don't have confidence in themselves as athletic directors, because sometimes athletic directors make good hires but got lucky. Rest in peace, Mal Moore. That was the luckiest hire in the world. Nick Saban just happened to be available, and the boosters gave him all the money in the world to go get Nick Saban. Remember, he wanted Rich Rodriguez first, and he also wanted Greg Schiano first, and he couldn't get either of them. And then
I think he was. I always wondered about that. Did he really want them, or did he did make overtures? Did he make overtures because he didn't think he could get Nick Saban? That's something I'd like to,
the boosters basically told Mal Moore, come back with Nick Saban or don't come back. that's basically what they
right. I do believe that happened at the end, but did he really make a run? I think he did make a run at Rodriguez. I'm not sure that he made a real run at Schiano.
You're probably right. Maybe Schiano was a negotiating tactic. Rodriguez used Alabama to negotiate a better deal with West Virginia and then bolted West Virginia for Michigan 2 years later, ironically, since we're talking about Michigan. But sometimes you hit, there's not, I think Danny White is one of the few athletic directors where there's actually some genius in his hiring. There's not a lot of genius in hiring Nick Saban if he's on the market, or Urban Meyer. There's not, the same way with Jerry West is considered a great GM in the NBA, there's not a lot of genius in signing Shaq. There's genius in drafting Kobe. There's no genius in signing Shaq. He wants to go to LA. You open up the checkbook for Shaq in his prime.